All right, we wrapped one up last week. We were done with James, and I was trying to think where we ought to go from there, and I got to thinking this week we've done James, we've done Galatians, we've done Revelation, we've done Second John, topical study on prayer, and one on Abraham. So I was thinking we're a little light on Old Testament as far as what we've been covering in Bible class. So I looked through, try to find a good one, and we're going to start Nehemiah this morning. Nehemiah. I think there's a whole lot of good practical stuff in Nehemiah, and I think we see in his character a character that we could really use in today's situation. Just a strong-headed guy who had focus, and he was going to get stuff done no matter what was coming up against him, and really in a time that you wouldn't have expected anybody to be able to get anything done. Just everything was stacked against him. So if you want to turn there, we'll go through a little bit of introduction, history type material, but we will try to get to the text today. If you look at your list of Old Testament books, the way it's laid out in your Bible today, Nehemiah is next to last as far as the historical books are concerned. And then after Nehemiah comes Esther, and then you start with the books of wisdom and poetry. You have Job through Song of Solomon. And then after that you have the prophets. But the thing is, it sits that way because for a long, long time, Ezra and Nehemiah were combined as a two-part work. It was Ezra 1 and Ezra 2 is what it was. That's the way it still sits in the Hebrew Bible. And what it really amounts to is the Hebrews have one book for every letter of their alphabet. The books of their scripture are kind of like a, what do you call that? Not an acrostic, but just the A, B, C, and they go like that. But they kind of force it to work that way. I think all the prophets are smushed into one book to make it work out that way. And really, Ezra and Nehemiah are completely separate, written by separate people. It's related events that occur within about 75 years of each other, but it's really two separate things. And what you come out with because of that is actually Nehemiah's last. Esther became queen about 35 years before Nehemiah built his wall. So this really is the last historical point in Jewish history before we enter the silent period, that intertestament period. This is the last time God is going to be working through the government of Israel, trying to work through that nation as a nation. And so really Nehemiah's kind of setting it back all up in order, and then we enter the silent period. It's like, this is it. This is the last time we're setting this back up like this. And then we don't know a whole lot of the in-between, but we have some secular writings that kind of fill in some gaps for us. Not inspired, but they help. Just a little timeline, just kind of to flesh this out exactly where we are in Jewish history. That the wall's being built about 444 BC. So this is our wall right here. I don't know if this is too low for y'all to see or not. That's about 444 BC. We're starting all the way up here. Creation. There's an incredible span of time that occurs before we have any biblical events to speak of. When you read the genealogies and you add the years up, really from creation to flood, we have a real huge chunk of time, and we're only to like Genesis 5-6 right here. So a whole bunch there that we really don't have a lot of information about. Creation to flood. After the flood, God waits 427 years, and he calls Abram. So creation to flood, then flood to Abram. After Abram, we have Isaac, Jacob. Then we have 430 years of captivity in Israel. Coming out of that, we have the giving of the law through Moses, and then from the law to the building of the temple. I think I might be missing one here. Law to temple, 480 years. Yeah, I'm missing one here. Let me erase this. From temple to captivity, 380 years. There we go. That really might be too low for you. From law to temple, we have 480 years. We have the temple. Solomon's temple stands for 380 years. We have multiple kings. Really, Solomon's the last king of the United Kingdom. After this, these are not great kings for the most part, but from temple to captivity, 380 years. Nebuchadnezzar comes in, wipes them out, 586 BC. And then we have about 140 years until we come back, and that's where we are right here in Nehemiah. And then we have this 440 years until Christ. So really, if we're looking at biblical history, we've come a long way. We are down at the very tail end, and we're just about to enter a period waiting for the Christ. The Jewish community is kind of depressed at this point in time. They really, as I said, this period right here was not a period of faithfulness following Solomon. For the most part, they were leaving God. You had prophets who were trying to call them back to God all throughout that period, and then they enter captivity for it. After about 40, 50 years, they start coming back in waves. Zerubbabel brings back the first wave. Ezra brings back a wave. But the city is just still in ruins. They have no protection. They have enemies on every side. And you would think that the destruction would have finally been that turning point in their minds where we need to be faithful to God again. That was not the case. The priesthood was still corrupt. They're really just spiritually, physically, socially, economically, and in every way they're a depressed people. And so this Nehemiah's going to set it up again. He's got to come in, not just build a wall, but he's got to rebuild this people, this depressed and broken down people. And it's interesting with some of these up here, like with the law. I mean, Moses did wonders. There was great miracles associated with that. I mean, with the flood, miracles. There's not going to be any miracles in Nehemiah. This is not some flashy Elijah fire from heaven type deal. This is just a plain and simple call back to purity. This is what the law says. This is what we ought to be doing. Well, we need to rebuild this place. And that's it. We're going to set it back in place. And I think we know kind of the end of the story, because when we get back down to here to Christ, well, they didn't keep it in place. They've spiritually left God again. If y'all want to look at Matthew chapter 13 with me, I think this kind of sums up what happened. We don't know everything that happened in that 440 years, but this is the result of what happens in that 440 years. Matthew 13, if somebody wants to read for us verses 14 through 15. Okay, so Nehemiah is this last call to spiritual purity for the nation of Israel, but when Jesus comes on the scene 440 years later, he looks at them and still says this: you are people who have closed your eyes, closed your ears, you're dull of seeing, hearing, you're not turning. They didn't, even at this, even at the restoration that Nehemiah brought, really, it did not turn the people the way that it was supposed to. But even at that, we do see incredible things that Nehemiah was able to accomplish during his time there. And as I said, I think a study of his character is very needed today. I mean, he had this laser-like focus to get stuff done. And everything around him, you would have said, Nehemiah, you're not going to be able to do all the things you're setting out to do. And Nehemiah just, with a passion, went at it anyway. and he was able to do so many things that nobody would have thought he could have gotten done. He struggles against the outside enemies. He struggles against the inside enemies. He struggles to get this huge building project done, and he gets it all done. The wall is rebuilt within 2 months. Just an incredible feat. What we can see in somebody that has this stick-to-itiveness. A little bit about Nehemiah the person. Let's look at the text. Nehemiah 2:3. There's 2 thoughts about his ancestry. What tribe did he fit in? What line did his family come through? Somebody read Nehemiah 2:3 for us.
I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?
Okay, thought number 1 is that he was from the kingly line of Judah. Because if he is literally talking about a city where his forefathers, his own family line, where their tombs were, that would be Jerusalem, what he's talking about. That would place him in the tribe of Judah, because that would have been their territory if he is literally talking about his family. Now, he's talking to the king at this point, and he is explaining why he is sad. He could be talking just generically, my people. That's where my people are buried. The Israelite people, not just my tribe, but my people. That there is a passage in 2 Maccabees, not an inspired book, but in a historical book, and it mentions Nehemiah offering sacrifices on the altar. If we can trust that, if that's a true account, then that would actually place him in the tribe of Levi, because only a Levite could have been serving in that role. So whether he is talking about his specific city, he's of the tribe of Judah, maybe not, he might be a Levite. We kind of see, Moses was a Levite. We kind of see some Moses in Nehemiah, a lot of the same characteristics. But either way, he's a guy who's got this high position when we come to him in Persia. Chapter 1, verse 11 says he was the cupbearer to the king. This would have been a very trusted, a very high position. The cupbearer made sure the king did not get poisoned. I mean, he was very close and near at hand for the king. And we also, it's more than just the cupbearer. We kind of see a friendship between the king and Nehemiah. There's a closeness that I think we can pick up on. The ruler is King Artaxerxes Longimanus. History tells us that he had a friendly temperament. He was just a nice guy. He had already proven himself to be friendly towards the Jews. He was really, really good for them. Let's look at verse 2 in chapter 2. We actually see that the king, let's just read that. Somebody read for us chapter 2, verse 2. Okay, so the king picks up on the fact that he's sad, and he cares enough to ask about it. I mean, that's kind of, I would hope that's the way I would be if I was a king. Just kind of familiar with your subjects and just talk to them. And but you don't always see that in these kings, and especially these Persian kings. But that's the way King Artaxerxes was. He asked about it, and then Nehemiah tells him, verse 3. He tells him, verse 4, the king asks, well, what do you want? And look down at verse 6 through 9, and the king just piles resources on top of Nehemiah, just at this one request. First of all, he's going to do without a cupbearer for a couple of months. I mean, this is vacation time he gives Nehemiah at his request. But more than that, he gives him timber out of the king's forest. I mean, that's a pretty good chunk of resources there. He gives him all the timber that he needs. He sends letters with Nehemiah pledging protection so that Nehemiah could go safely through the areas that he needed to go to get back to Jerusalem. And the king also sends captains of his army, and he sends horsemen to go with Nehemiah for protection to make sure this job gets done. So I think we see kind of a loving relationship between Nehemiah and the king. Now, the king has high respect for this person of Nehemiah. And kind of practical point number one, notice something here. God's plan is to support his people, to promote his causes through his institutions. In this case, it would be the Israelite people, maybe the Israelite monarchy, the priesthood. That's God's plan. But at this point in time, the priesthood is corrupt. The people are broken down. The monarchy is not in place, really. Zerubbabel's gone back. But God uses this pagan king in Nehemiah's case to support his cause, to get his plan back in motion, so to speak. And this is not the only case of this happening. If you look at Acts chapter 10, you see Cornelius there in the city of Caesarea, and he's called a God-fearer, a man who fears God. Wasn't a Jew, wasn't a Christian yet when we first see him. He's just a man who fears God. And there's some respect. Cornelius is spoken of as a good guy, even though he wasn't really integrated into God's plan yet. But God sends him Peter, and he teaches him how he can become a Christian. But he was a God-fearer when we first see him. Look at the stories of Rahab the harlot, Cyrus the Persian. Moses had a father-in-law named Jethro. All three of these people, and I think you could probably find more, not Jews, not Christians, but those who God used to get his plan done anyway, those who God brought in. And I think we see, like in Cornelius with Rahab, they were brought to salvation. Rahab was integrated into the Jewish people. Cornelius was taught to be a Christian. I think the practical point for us is to be aware of those God-fearers in our lives. You know, those people that may not know the truth, may not have come to the truth yet, but they are willing to support what we're about. They love people who love God. They love God. And maybe we have an evangelistic opportunity there. Just to be aware. Don't shut anybody out just because they're not in yet. Because God has used God-fearers in the past. And he would have us reach out to them. So let's go ahead and let's look at the text. Let's go ahead and get started with that. First 4 verses. If somebody would read for us, Nehemiah 1 through 4. Okay, thank you. So, just a couple of interesting notes that pop out of here. I've already noted that we've come about 35 years from Esther becoming queen, and Ezra's about in here, Esther's about right here, and then we have Nehemiah with his wall right here. By the way, Nehemiah is a contemporary of Malachi the prophet, so Malachi is also prophesying at this time. All those things that are happening at the tail end of the period that we have record of, that's taking place right here. We're also, I guess, let's see, Captivity 586. Daniel's right about here. So Daniel's just a little bit further removed. You're looking at about 150 years right there between Daniel and Nehemiah. The scripture actually uses this same place over and over again. If you want to look at Esther 1 verse 2, it says, "In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel." And I just remind you what was just read, Nehemiah 1:1. as I was in Shushan the citadel. Going back to Esther, she became queen in this palace where Nehemiah is saying, I was here when my brethren came to me. We're in the same place. Also, that's not all. Daniel 8 and verse 2 says, I saw in a vision, and so it happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw a vision. So Daniel, his visions, his ministry and prophecy involved this same palace. So I think it's just one more interesting thing that comes out of the continuity of Scripture, that we know Jerusalem, we know the events that take place in Jerusalem, but even this Persian capital here, the Shushan, Nehemiah here is receiving bad news from his brethren, standing in the same place where Esther would have walked those halls. Daniel would have been there. Just one more thing that ties these scriptural books together. The primary messenger here, we're told Hananiah comes. He's called a brother of Nehemiah. Hananiah, one of my brethren, came to me with men from Judah. They would have used the word brother just like we do. This could have been just an Israelite brother, but there's a couple of indications that maybe this was actually a blood brother of Nehemiah. First of all, when we read, Hananiah, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah. Well, if those men from Judah are also Jews, then it just kind of seems odd that he had set Hananiah aside as one of my brethren. They would have all been his brethren if they were all Jews from Judah. That's thing number one. Thing number two, if you look at Nehemiah 7 and verse 2, he says, I gave the charge of Jerusalem to my brother Hananiah, and Hananiah the leader of the citadel. Here he's back in Jerusalem in Nehemiah chapter 7. Everybody around him is a Jew, and yet he points out Hananiah specifically as being my brother. So there seems to be probably a real brother relationship here. His brother has come to him from this mess in Jerusalem, and he's telling him all these things that are going on. He said they're in great distress. The wall's broken down. Its gates are burned with fire. That's not necessarily meaning that it just happened. He's probably pointing to the fact that it's been broken down and burned with fire for the last 150 years, and it's still that way. In kind of our way of thinking, that Zerubbabel brought him back about 100 years before this point. If some of the towns decimated by World War I had been inhabited back then when they were decimated and still inhabited to this day, that's about the same time reference. They've been laying in waste for that long. And so this is terrible. I mean, the holy city, Jerusalem, has been in this shape for 100 years since there have been people living there. 150 years since it actually happened. And Josephus actually adds to Hananiah's account. He says that the Jews were subjected to harassment day and night, and even dead people could be found in the roads. So this is a really bad situation that's going on in Jerusalem right now. And really, we don't live inside walled cities. We don't live around people that want to kill us all the time. But in this day and time, this was a bad thing, to have your wall broken down. Proverbs 25:28, whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. I mean, they knew this to be a terrible situation, to not have walls around you. And so Nehemiah weeps. He sits down, verse 4. He mourns for many days. He fasted, and he prayed to God. And it's just this terrible situation. I want to stop in the text right now and let's talk about some practical lessons, because we are talking about this because we want to learn for today and learn for the church. What would be the spiritual equivalent? We know we're the church. We're kind of the new picture of Jerusalem, God's place where he dwells. What would be the spiritual equivalent of having our walls torn down? Or living in a society where the enemies could just harass us at will? Well, we know that Satan wants to harass us at any time, but there's supposed to be walls of protection in place What would be the spiritual equivalent of being in a church with our walls torn down? And I want to I know I've been kind of speeding through the history and the text, but I want to kind of slow down and kind of bounce this around for a little bit. Just more of a discussion question.
Well, if something happened to our laws that protects free speech and freedom of religion, if something stopped where we could not express our views on religion and stuff, then, we'd be in the same situation.
Yeah. And that's a good point. For me, the separation between government and church is it's not as black and white as what I used to think. Well, it doesn't really matter what the government it is, whether it's like this, whether it's like it is today. The church's charge is the same either way. And that's true, it is the same either way. But Paul, I believe, tells Timothy, pray for peace. Pray for the government so that you may be able to conduct yourselves in a peaceful environment. And so I think it is important that we do everything we can do as citizens to keep this nation that we have.
And Satan, through different individuals, have chipped away at our religious freedom that we have. First of all, it was that we could not teach the Bible in school. We could not lead prayer in school. I know that in some of the cities and everything, they basically passed laws saying that people could not teach the Bible on buses.
Hmm.
They were people that were going on buses that were discussing Christianity and stuff on the bus, and they basically passed a ban on that, because it was causing some conflict.
You just wonder, you hear the analogy of boiling a frog, and how, well, there's got to be one point at which the frog finally dies. Where's the point at which we say enough is enough, and what do we do about it as far as what we see in our society right now? I don't know. I think we're probably fighting it as much as we can right now, but there's going to come a point in time where it's going to be either go to jail or go along. I know when we took a trip up to Canada, and I say we, the church did, I wasn't able to go on that trip, but when they got there, they were warned, now don't say anything about homosexuality from this pulpit, because it actually is a hate crime up here, and you actually can go to jail for it. And, thank God we don't have that situation here yet. But there's going to come a time where there's going to have to be decisions made. And I don't, even if they pass that law today, I think I could probably still preach a sermon here in Maud, and that law's not going to be enforced. People don't want to enforce that law, but it'll grow, it'll come. I think that's a good analogy of the walls. What's some others? Because I think even in a day and time such as Jesus' day, where the government was just completely not there for the church, you could still say the church spiritually has walls of protection around its people. What are some of our, maybe in more spiritual terms, what are our walls that we have to maintain in the church? AC's holding up one right back there. Yeah. I think, well, that's probably wall number one right there. Are we teaching truth? Are we protecting our people with scriptural truth? Because I think even you talk about losing the young people don't want to hear hard messages anymore. I don't believe that's true. I believe even young people, even people that want to do what they want to do, if they can understand it and they can see the point in what you're teaching them, and they can put two and two together and see it's hard, but I understand what you're saying there, I think they do flock to even hard truths. And there's some groups out there that don't see it that way. We've got to make it easy for people. We got to Don't press those laws. Don't talk about hell. Don't talk about these things. But unless we're reconciling people to biblical truth, our walls are not there. There's no protection for our people if they can't come here and hear this is what God says about X, Y, and Z. That's why they come. That's why we come, to be brought to God, to know what God would have us to do.
I don't think our young people have that much trouble accepting a hard truth as long as they're not looking at their parents and seeing hypocrisy.
Yes.
This business, do as I say, not as I do,
Mm-hmm.
we've all experienced it at one time or the other, but if a person grows up and they can look at their parents as the moral figure and they can see their parents, the image that their parents are supposed to be reflected in the Bible, then I don't think they have that problem of accepting the hard truth.
I agree 100%. So what you're saying is, I want you to believe it, but I don't believe it. They're looking at you saying, well, you're telling me I need to believe this, but apparently you don't, because you're not doing it. And yeah, I agree 100%. I think another one of our walls kind of balance an old thing with a new thing. Cultural relevance. Cultural relevance. There can be a church that tries too hard to be culturally hip, or whatever you might say, to leave truth even to get that way. There can also be a church that is not culturally relevant at all, not with the issues of the times. I remember thumbing through the library at one point in time, the church library, and I found a book, and it was great, and it said, How to Relate to Young People Today, and it was written in the 1950s. Like, wait a second. Something's not clicking right here. Can you imagine going to an accountant, here, do my taxes? He learned from books from the 1950s. Going to a surgeon, here, operate on my appendix. He learned from 1950 textbooks. When we want somebody to be up on their profession and know what they're doing, we want to be up on what's going on today. Kids, truth does not change. Truth does not change. Human nature does not change. Culture changes. The current issues and the current events, the current questions change. Methods change. All these things do change. And kids, I keep saying kids because I think that's really where the crux of a lot of these questions comes down to. Kids have questions that they're encountering today, and they need answers to those questions from today. They need to know what to think and how to address homosexual marriage. They weren't writing about that very much in 1950, I don't think. They need to know the answer to these questions. And it's a lot easier to come up with a theoretical, here's exactly what the Bible says on the issue answer, versus your best friend at school just said that they're a homosexual. How do you address that? What do you say? Yeah, it's wrong. I can point you where it's wrong, but what do you say? How do you deal with that? How do you reconcile that person to God? Hard questions, harder questions than just is it right or is it wrong? I love this year's VBS because evolution is coming. We've been seeing it coming for a long, long time, but it's pretty much 100% for sure. If your kids go through high school, they're going to hear about it. If they go to college, they're going to be hammered with it. And they need to know. They need to have answers to these questions. Pornography. I know pornography existed going way back, but it is just one click away right now. It is one swipe away on your iPhone right now.
You don't even have to swipe sometimes.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's scary, and I know. I think I know the situation you're talking about. I've been hit with it too, where all of a sudden something's there, and it's like I don't want people to think I was looking at that, but it came in anyway, and it's here, and they need answers to these questions. Sex, even in middle school, they need answers to these questions. We need to be a place that's culturally relevant, integrated, knowing the questions that are coming before we hear them. And a lot of times they don't even know how to ask them. They're dealing with something and they're even either ashamed to ask, or they don't even know how to word the question. And we got to have those answers. So I think we'll wrap that thought up right there. That's a form of our walls. If our kids, if our adults don't know that they can come into the church and be protected from these things, as in we give them good answers to those hard questions, that's the protection that we ought to be offering here in the church. And I think we do. I think we do a good job. We just got to make sure that we maintain that. All right, let's go get our kids, and we'll pick up there next week.